Hello and welcome to our very first episode of Code and Coffee, a series where we discuss various technologies and best practices and the latest in tech news, brought to you by the Mozilla Campus Club of SLIIT. So, my name is Saru Bopitir, and today we'll be kicking off this great series with the topic clean code. So, grab your coffee and let's get started. So there is this really fascinating and interesting book called Clean Code, written by a person called Robert Cecil Martin. So I recommend you guys to check it out as well. It's really fascinating and really interesting of how he goes into detail of why clean code is really important and how often it gets overlooked in the industry and has caused serious issues uh, throughout history. So, if we go further into our session, right? So this is something that I found pretty interesting and unique in his book. So he mentions in his book that the only valid measurement of code quality is the number of WTFs per minute. So what does this mean? I mean, I'm not going to say what WTF means, but so why does he mention that the only valid measurement of code quality is the number of WTFs per minute? So this is something that I stole from his book. So this is a comic. I think it's some sort of comical drawing. So there are two doors, right? And behind one door, so behind both doors, it's the code review process that's happening, right? So you can see that the number of WTFs coming from the door on the left hand side is pretty less. So maybe there are some good code written by that developer. So if we look at the right hand door, you can see there's so many WTFs coming out per minute. So what is this? What is the meaning of this code block? So this just goes to show you the contrast between good code and bad code. So behind the bad code, it means there's a whole lot of WTFs coming out from behind that door. So this just goes to show you what happens when you write bad code, because it's not easy to understand, it's not meaningful in most cases. So let's go ahead now. Why, or rather what exactly is clean code? So I'll read out a direct quote that I found somewhere. So the proper definition for clean code is that clean code is code that's easy to read, easy to understand, and easy to maintain. It's well structured, follows a consistent style, and emphasizes clarity and simplicity. It's a long definition. But if we look at its code, it's just three things, right? It should be easy to understand, it should be easy to read, and it should be easy to maintain. So it's just three things, three check boxes that make up really good clean code. So why do we need clean code? Let's look at that now. Why do we need clean code? So there are some 4 points that you can basically look into, but writing clean code isn't just about making your code look pretty, right? It's not about linting and stuff like that. It directly affects how quickly you can build software, build features, fix your bugs, and scale up your application. So it's also about professionalism. When you're working in a tech company, professionalism is highly valued. So writing clean code just goes to show you that you respect the other developers within your team. And because when you're working in a company, it's not just you who's working in a product. I hope it's not just you. So it's not just you who's working in that product. there are some other developers as well. Those developers need to know what you have written, right? They need to understand your code. They should be in a level to understand your code, and your code should be in a level that it's easy to understand, easy to read. So the team collaboration aspect and the professionalism is really important when we are maintaining and building applications. So collaboration, yes. Professionalism, yes. And maintainability, it's really important when you're maintaining applications. So if you write proper clean code, it just goes to show you that there won't be any more future bugs from the ones that you have written. So there won't be any regression bugs. Regression bugs are bugs which have been caused by certain implementations. So the number of regression bugs would be reduced, and it will be pretty easy to scale up your application. If you have written proper clean code, it will be easier for shipping updates in the future. So these are some of the reasons which are very critical um, in a tech company when you are working. So this is this just goes to show you how important clean code is, and how important testing and the QA side of software engineering comes into place. So clean code is a pretty important aspect when you are a developer, which often gets overlooked in my opinion. So now let's go over to some of the core principles of clean code. I hope you can see this. Yeah. So I'll just these are some 6 points. Basically, it's sort of like a checklist, but I'll briefly explain each one before we jump into the actual code examples. So the first one is meaningful names. So you need to I'll get into it in a demo. So you need to the variable names need to be descriptive. They need to be uh, they need to make sense. They need to be pronounceable, and it should be very clear, the variable names and the function names. So try to avoid abbreviations that make the whole context meaningless. So it will make much more sense to a person who is reading your code. Next is the single responsibility principle, which means this is very important because each function, class, or a module should do exactly just one thing. If it tries to handle multiple tasks, it would mean that your function could get messy, and it will often break in some cases, and it will also be harder to maintain. So make sure it has that single responsibility principle when you're writing functions. So this will be important in a maintainability aspect. And keep it simple, right? So don't overcomplicate things, don't overthink a lot. Sometimes the simplest solutions are often easier to read and also debug as well. So you need to think of the debugging aspect as well. And people go to extended and saying keep it simple and stupid, KISS, as well. So yeah, be stupid sometimes. That would also be effective, I believe. And don't repeat yourself. Dry, DRY. Don't repeat yourself. Try to avoid duplicating code in almost every case. So that would be really helpful when you're maintaining a code base. And have proper formatting and indentation, well structured and clear code. And this will often reduce the need for uh, like extra comments, I would say. So the last one is write self-documenting code. This also ties in with the fifth point. So you don't need to overload your code with comments, right? You don't need to add comments to each and every variable name, each and every function. You don't need to do that. So try to minimize the number of comments that you write. That's not just me saying don't write comments, but don't write a lot of comments. Try to find that balance in between uh, when writing comments in your code. So let's quickly go over to a bit of demo. I can share. Yeah. So this is a bad example and a good example of writing proper names when it comes to meaningful names, I would say. So we can see on the left hand side the bad example in red. This is a Python code. I mean, I just took a Python code because it's easier, and lot of many students understand Python as well. So you can see the function is there, calculate what exactly, because we don't know, the developer doesn't know what are you exactly calculating. So the good example, if you look at the good example, you can see that, oh, calculating the discount, and instead of using variables a and b, you can see in the good example you have used price, discount, percentage, which gives much more meaningfulness and context to a developer, so he doesn't need to know the exact full picture of it. He just needs to know that's what it's enough in order to either debug your code or go forward with it and extend your code. And if you look at this example, just goes to show you, this is sort of a combination between don't repeat yourself and trying to keep it simple. So if you look at the bad example, you can see there's the function called process numbers, and you have put so many things into that function. You have tried to filter numbers, the square numbers, and done a sum of it. And yeah, maybe it works, definitely. But it would be much easier to break this whole thing down into smaller and reusable functions. So the reusability factor is very important when you're writing code. So the good example, you can see there are three separate functions: filter events, and taking the square of it, and then processing it, and eventually returning the sum of the squares. So this just goes to show you that it's much more easier to read this code and easier to understand it as well. So it all boils down to those three things: easier to read, easier to understand, and easier to maintain. So if these three factors are basically kept in your mind as a developer, I think that would be really helpful in you becoming not just a good software engineer, but a great software engineer. So that's basically it for our first session, or I would say first episode of Code and Coffee and Clean Code. We are just, this is the first episode of a series of bite-sized content, basically 15-minute content, and we'll be doing this throughout. So thank you all, and that's it for our first episode of Code and Coffee. If you have any questions or comments, please drop them to our comments, and we hope that you'll start applying these clean code principles into your projects as well, because that will help you become a much better developer. So stay tuned for our next episode, where we will be diving more into things. So till next time, see you then.